We're Kaylin and Jillian, hosts of Teach Me How to Adult, a podcast on all the things we never learned growing up.
From how to crush your love life to landing your next dream job.
Life is full of transitions. Each of those really require letting go. Different doesn't mean bad.
You take action, you get rewarded, and then you have more motivation to repeat that action. Hack your brain, hack your life. We are growing up, friends.
We are adulting.
Follow us on social and listen to Teach Me How to Adult at frequencypodcastnetwork.com
or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production in association with City News.
I've got some bad news for you about your summer getaway plans. But honestly, if you've even advanced to the point of checking flights, you don't need me to tell you. You know it's going to cost you. Airfare has rarely been higher than it is right now, with trips to Europe well over $1,000 per ticket, even with the cheapest, most basic fares and carriers. Domestic prices, meanwhile, are climbing towards uncharted territory. And sure, it is nice if you have the money to take that vacation, and perhaps you don't need to complain too much. But not everyone flies for fun. Millions of Canadians have family overseas. Plenty of Canadians travel for school. And of course, there are always emergencies. So what's going on here right now? Obviously, the days of pandemic deals are over, but how high are current prices compared to what we'd consider normal or even fair? Why do even these expensive seats come with less and less travel essentials like checked bags or the ability to maybe switch flights if you need to? Why is the same ticket on the same plane priced 5 different ways for 5 different people in 5 different neighborhoods? How does airfare pricing work anyway? And is it a scam? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. John Gradek is a faculty lecturer in supply chain, logistics, operations, and aviation management at McGill University. Hey, John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. Does it surprise you to learn this is something we got a handful of letters about from listeners saying basically what the bleep is going on with airline prices?
Not surprising. I think, we're starting to see the peak season of demand starting to show up. This week is probably the precursor of what the summer peak is going to look like. And this is a traditional process that, the summer peak is starting mid-June and it goes through about early September. And if you want to fly anywhere in the world, in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the time where you can expect prices to be the highest of any period in the rest of the year.
Let's talk about context for that, because one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode is try to figure out how we can tell the difference between, just peak time, bad time to buy, or, this is higher than an X number of years. So how do we measure prices against prior seasons, prior years? There are so many different places to buy tickets. There's different carriers, there's fees, there's time differences. How do we index airline prices and track them?
There's no simple tool to do it. There's nothing that, I can say, go to Expedia or go to Flight Hub or go anywhere else. All of these sites have got some proprietary interaction with some service providers. So they're going to bias their results. So there really isn't any, what I would say, independent, third-party, non-influenced source of information about airfares. It is complicated. Carriers, change prices hourly, if not minute by minute.
Right.
So, you are very, very susceptible to a lot of changes.
But how would we know, for example, if the prices that we are seeing, right now, the week of June 19th, 2023, are worse than 2022 or 2021 at the same time? I guess that's my core question. Is our airline prices, at an extreme high right now, or is this part of the cycle?
Oh, it's at extreme highs. If you look at the pandemic starting, of course, in March 2020, and, the choking off of air services and people not wanting to fly, not being able to fly, that kind of put a crimp on demand and prices went through the floor. because airlines were trying to figure out, what's the best way to get people to fly in spite of COVID-19. And so they dropped their prices. So yeah, since March 2020 to today, we haven't seen these prices in at least 3 years. So this is about as high as you're going to get. And is it going to go any higher? Probably. And the reason for that is that, there's still pent up demand. Like even with these high prices that we're seeing in the marketplace, guess what? The planes are still full.
Right.
And that kind of tells me that, people have disposable income. They want to get away, and pricing is not going to stop them from getting away. So the carriers are going to keep pushing that envelope of pricing higher until such time as, the consumer says, okay, enough. We've had enough of these price increases. We're not going to travel anymore, or we're going to cut back on our travel. And I think that's the only solution we're going to see. So if you're flying from Toronto to Rome and it's costing you $2,000 round trip, and last year the same trip was at $1,000, well, summer 24 might be a little more than 2,000. So the airlines are pushing the envelope as much as they possibly can to maximize their revenue and profitability.
Is it all about the margins and the profitability, or are, as I've seen said, the margins slimmer now because costs are higher for airlines to run these services?
Well, my favorite saying is like, what's the quickest way to make $1 million in the airline industry? Start with 10 million. This is not a profitable business.
Right.
I've worked in a number of transportation industries, and I started off my career in airlines, and the typical margin that an airline has been working with over the last 40 years has been around 2%.
Wow.
2% of your revenues basically are bottom line. You can count that as profit. And in the pandemic years, no revenue, lots of expenses. So the losses accumulated and they ended up being, part of your losses and part of your debt.
Right.
So airlines now are saying, wait a second, here's a chance for us to kind of recover lost profitability, recoup our losses, and let's put some fares out there that we know people will buy, and we'll keep jacking those fares up until such time as they cry uncle. And that's what's happening. So the margins, if you look at the margins for summer 23 in isolation, just summer 2023, it'll probably be around 8-9%. Even though costs are high, but the fares have gone up through the roof, as you say. So the margins are not going to be great. I worked in the rail industry, in rail freight industries, and a typical margin in rail freight is about 35%.
Wow.
Typical, road transportation, 45%. So this is not a very profitable business. If you want to make lots of money, don't start an airline. You do it because you want to do it. You love airplanes. You like the smell of aviation fuel, whatever it is that drives you into getting into an airline. But, money and profitability and high profits is not part of the equation.
I'm going to ask this on behalf of the consumer everywhere. Why are prices higher than ever before, and at the same time, every ticket comes with less? Checked luggage is almost never free anymore. Seat picking even is no longer allowed on some fares. Why are there ever fewer actual benefits to buying a seat? Being able to choose your seat, being able to check a bag, all that kind of stuff, while prices are through the roof. This is my bit of consumer advocacy, but I got to ask you, it sounds like BS.
Yeah, it is a little BS, because I think that what's happening right now is that, we've had a new brand of carriers show up in the marketplace, and we call them ULCCs, which are ultra low cost carriers. And in Canada, they branded themselves as Flair and Lynx and Canada Jet Lines, and until last week, Swoop. And their business model is based on European ULCCs like Ryanair and EasyJet. And in the US, you have Southwest, Spirit, Allegiant. Those are the carriers that basically pride themselves in being able to, in fact, offer low fares, but low services. Mm-hmm. And so their modus operandi has been to keep the fares low, but everything you want that's going to be considered as over and above the basic service of providing you with a seat to fly from point A to point B. And that includes luggage, that includes getting a boarding pass, that includes making a change. All of those things, these carriers have basically said that's an additional service, an ancillary service that is over and above the provision of just that seat. So if you want any of those ancillary services, and not everybody wants them, you'll pay for it. So you pay for a check bag and you pay double for 2 check bags. So you pay for carry-on bags. You pay for a ticket that you want issued. You pay for a boarding pass. You pay for a meal. You pay to talk to an agent. And the objective of the exercise is to provide as low a cost seat as you possibly can. So that when guys like Steve Jones of Flair say, my objective as a carrier is to get your bum off the sofa, off the couch, and get on an airplane. And I will try to price the ticket to that point. When I do that pricing and I still have to make money, I have to basically charge you for all the other stuff that you think you need as a passenger.
He's been arrested and he'll be going in front of the judge this morning.
I'm Amelia King, and for the past 3 years, me and my team have been tracking serial fraudster Marcel André Vautour, and we finally caught him, or so we thought.
I'm concerned that he'll be released on bail.
The prosecution of this matter is not in the public interest.
He was supposed to be in rehab, but forget it.
From the Frequency Podcast Network and Pink Moon Studio, this is Catch 'Em If You Can. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Find your frequency.
When you say that now is the time, especially because of pent-up demand, that the airlines are trying to maximize their profitability, how does that actually work in practice? Like, how do they determine how to fluctuate pricing, as you say, minute to minute, to make sure that they're getting as much as they possibly can for a ticket to London or Paris, but not pricing it so high that nobody will buy it?
Well, we've heard the term artificial intelligence, right? And guess what? They're using it.
Oh, yeah?
I was involved in the business of trying to understand seats and pricing and how much capacity to offer at each fare level that we have, 35 years ago at Air Canada. And the science has evolved significantly since then, but it really is a question of the airlines know what you're going to buy. They know your shopping behavior. So they will adjust what they show you in the screens that you're looking at, whether handheld or desktop or whatever. They'll adjust the prices based on your typical buying habits. So you look at a flight between Toronto and London, England, and you look at that flight 3 or 4 times a day, and you look at the prices, and the prices will change every time you look at it. Why is that? Because the airlines know you are looking, and they will, in fact, adjust the price to a point where they will say, okay, let's see, next time he or she looks, let's change the price. Let's drop the price some more. Maybe they'll buy it at a next price. So their understanding of your shopping behavior and then your buying behavior is the way in which they price it. So it's called dynamic pricing.
Right.
In the old days, it used to be a fare and everybody paid the same fare, right?
Yeah.
Not anymore. You have a 300 seat airplane with 300 passengers on the airplane. Every single one of them could have paid a different price. They know that, you bought the ticket to London, England last summer and you paid X for that ticket. This year, you're going to pay X plus 20% to start with. And if you don't buy it, next time you come and look, X plus 15%. And they'll keep adjusting the price until such time as you buy.
If seats are at an extreme high right now, let's talk about, the next 6 months to a year.
Yep.
You mentioned that it might go down in the fall or it could continue to climb. And I want to ask you specifically about how consolidation might impact that. WestJet bought Swoop. Now they're taking control of Sunwing and phasing that out. How does that impact prices that consumers will pay?
It all depends strategically what our friends at WestJet are trying to do. And I'm serious. I think that WestJet is doing these consolidations, first of all, to reduce its costs. So rather than running 3 HR departments or 3 purchasing departments or 3 finance departments across the 3 airlines, they're doing it with 1. So they're consolidating, they're rationalizing, they're getting their costs down so that they compete more effectively against the ultra low cost carriers in Canada. My assumption is that they want to basically get their costs in line so they can compete more directly with Flair and Lynx. If that's the case, and Sunwing is going to take 2 years to do it, but if they decide that they want to become a much more aggressive now, they may start to have a price war coming this fall. So Canadians are going to be in a situation where, yes, you're paying $3.99 to go from Toronto to Vancouver one way this summer. But come the fall, if you thought it was cheap in February and March of this year, you're going to get the same price come October, November. Prices will come back down and come down significantly. So we'll be back to $99 fares between Toronto and Vancouver or Toronto, Calgary by October, November.
That's heartening news. Before I let you go, I have to ask you for your own personal tips.
Yeah.
What's your go-to method to find affordable airfare in this country?
Well, the price leader in Canada is Flair. And this is not a paid commercial for Flair. They've been very aggressive in the marketplace. I think that the team has got the message across that, you can't find anything cheaper than Flair. The issue is customer service. And the way in which customer service is being provided by Flair leaves a lot to be desired. So there's a price you pay for, looking at cheap seats. And with Flair don't expect a lot of service. Don't expect a lot of attention. If the flights gets canceled, the flights gets delayed, you lose your bag. Patience is the operative word in dealing with Flair.
Right.
But cheap seats are there. And so if you ask me if I want to fly anywhere in Canada, who do I go see first to give me the benchmark price against which I will make my buying decision? Is check out Flair. Then you say, okay, how many bags am I going to carry? Am I got any connections? What time of year is it? Stuff like that. And then you scale up. You go to Lynx, you go to WestJet, you go to Air Canada, you even go to Porter.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lots of choices. But if you want the bottom price, to me, it's Flair, but you take a chance.
What about international travel, and how do you recommend people book to make sure they get the best deal? Is it book well in advance, book at the last minute, use apps like Hopper, which I believe you mentioned earlier, to compare flights? Like how should people navigate this time, especially when it's at such a high?
Well, again, it's a question of how much time do you have to spend looking.
Right.
There used to be the old adage that, the further out you book, the cheaper the price. Not anymore. The airlines manage their capacity very proactively, minute by minute, as I mentioned earlier. So you look at a price today for a flight going next weekend, you'll get X dollars. And you look at it tomorrow, it may be X minus 200 or it could be X plus 200. All depends on who else is buying that flight. So, it's a very dynamic world. I know I'm using the term quite a bit, but it really is a lot of risk out there in terms of understanding when you should buy tickets. My core advice is buy the ticket as late as you possibly can, but not too late so that the airlines basically jack it up so that you can't afford it anymore. So, and that's kind of a benign piece of advice. But, if you haven't got the time, just talk to a travel agent. Let them do all the work. It's going to cost you $50 or $60 as a service fee to get them to do it. But that's their job, and they've got to watch and they've got to understand what's going on across the different modes of transportation and the different airlines. And if you haven't got the time to do that, let the professionals do it. Yeah, they'll charge you for it. But, at the end of the day, what they charge you is probably a lot less than what the fare difference is going to be if you have to do it yourself.
If you do it yourself, I'm just curious, do those apps actually work? Do we know that you can find the lowest price on them, or are they biased as well?
Yeah, I think, guys like Hopper or Flight Hub, the big consolidators, Expedia, they do a pretty good job of comparing flights, and they shop. But, like I said, because prices, can change on a drop of a hat, I look at a price and I'll say, okay, if I'm going from Toronto to Rome, maybe Air Canada's got the cheapest flight now. I look at it in an hour from now, maybe KLM is cheaper than Air Canada. An hour from now, maybe LOT Polish Airlines is cheaper. So it really depends on the time that you spent in front of a screen and keep looking. But the more you look, the more the airlines know you're looking.
Right.
From a passenger perspective, it's scary, it's disconcerting. But to me, that tells me leave it to the professional.
John, thank you so much for this. As always, fascinating dive into the industry.
Oh, it's gonna be a lot of fun in the future. Let me tell you, we ain't seen nothing yet.
John Gradek of McGill University. That was the big story. You can find more, including a previous conversation with John where he kind of predicted this thing at thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can always send us an episode suggestion. This episode was suggested by a couple of listeners and by me independently verifying just how crazy these prices are. You can reach out to us anytime on Twitter at TheBigStoryFPN. You can send us an email, hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, and you can call us and tell us, with your voice, what you'd like us to cover. The phone number is 416-935-5935. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.
I'm Laura Palmer, host of Island Crime. On Season 5, Whiskey Creek, I explore the untold story of a Halloween night massacre on Vancouver Island.
So nobody's even trying to figure out who murdered my son.
It's a natural thing to say when no loss to humanity.
Nobody deserved what happened up there, period.
Listen to Whiskey Creek at frequencypodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Find your frequency.